What is up, theology nerds? Guess what? This episode is dedicated to friends.
Friends are friends.
Forever.
That's right.
Only if the Lord's the Lord of them. Michael W. Smith is against heathens being friends forever. But you know what the W stands for? Wrong. You heathens can even be friends.
Look at that.
Without the identification of Jesus as Lord. Though personally, I'm not against that.
Yeah.
I just don't think the good old phileo love, the friendly love, I don't think Jesus is necessary for it to be friends forever.
Yeah.
Unless forever is attached to an eschatological assessment in which only people that are friends with Jesus get in. In that case, you should only be friends with either just Christians or just heathens.
There you go.
Because maybe he thinks everyone goes to one or two places and you have to have Jesus. But that is not getting discussed in this episode.
Just to clarify.
Michael Wrong Smith. Friends are friends forever if you're really friends.
Period.
And you keep showing up for your relationship.
There you go.
And I keep showing up for my relationship with my friend Ryan, Andrew Newson. Now, I want you to know something. He's a real theologian. He went to Wake Forest University School of Divinity. That's where I went.
Hashtag Deek Pick.
And for undergrad, he went to the Demon Deacons. Yeah. Don't distract me.
Sorry, go ahead.
Before they went to Elon University for undergrad, he was a student of Jeffrey C. Pugh, author of the Homebrewed Christianity Guide to the End.
There it is.
But before that, he went to Broughton High School. Broughton High School is a problematic school to go to. It's in downtown Raleigh. Pistol Pete Maravich, the basketball player, went there. And the only problem with Broughton is that it's not Enloe High School where I went in downtown Raleigh.
Well, clearly that's a problem.
Yeah. And now he did join the theology reading group I started in high school after I'd left. And so, like, my friends and people are younger than me, and they were at that point.
So they were no longer heathens at that point.
Well, if you went to Broughton and were in my theology reading group after I left, you're okay for being in Broughton.
Gotcha.
And his senior year, he joined, and they read Fear and Trembling by Kierkegaard was the book.
Wow.
And so I feel like I should appreciate him. And then he went to Wake Div. And then he went to Fuller for his PhD in ethics. And then he wrote this book about radical friendship. And
there it is.
And so we're friends. Now, this is just an aside. And I'm telling you this in advance. We're friends. So we kind of talk about the book, and we kind of talk about Donald Trump, and we kind of talk about Southern religion and how many people there find ways of not taking actual stands on most issues that are important and how it irritates us. But that's because we're both, like, from the South. So I was told by someone that heard this that I should probably clarify that we're both very Southern. And so, you know, it's kind of like you can pick on your crazy uncle, but if you're actually a Californian and you pick on my crazy uncle, I'm going to be like, whatever, dude, y'all weren't even in the war.
Right.
They're like, what war? The War of Northern Aggression. And you're like, oh, yeah, that's what my crazy family calls it. So, like, you know, Southerners have their own baggage. And we talk about it at the second half of this podcast in the context of Mennonite understandings of friendship and reconciliation and local activism and organizing and stuff. The book's great. And the other thing I'd say is Ryan Andrew Newsom has changed which his first or middle name he goes by. And I honestly don't know which one people call him right now.
It's a mystery.
I get it confused. Either in high school he was called Ryan or Andrew, and then he switched back, and it's just confusing. Because when I'm with my friends that knew him before, it's one, and the others, it's the other, and now I don't even know. Exactly. This is what I told Matt Mormon and I. Matt Mormon was in the group. Matt Mormon, I'm sure he's been on the podcast before at some point, but he agrees with me that you should not switch your name in the middle.
It's very confusing.
It's just this would be like if next week I was like, "Hi, my name is Hiram Fuller." That's my middle name. Like, y'all don't know that. My actual
now you
name's
do.
George Hiram Fuller III.
Boom. There it is.
I know, but if I next week I
Watch
was like,
out for all those
welcome
identity
to
thieves."
homebrewed Christianity. This is Hiram. You're gonna be like, what's? If we started calling you Charles,
Yeah, that'd be weird. That's
Mm-hmm.
my middle name. Yeah.
if it wasn't your middle name, it'd be weirder.
That'd be even weirder.
We just started calling you Spanky.
Chuck. Hey, Chuck.
Spanky like the Little Rascals.
Yeah.
Because you're a rascal.
That's it.
Anyway, Ryan or Andrew or Newsom wrote a book about radical friendship. And we started to talk about it before we talked about everything else. And I just want to say, in all seriousness, I've known the guy for such a long time. I always knew he's a high-quality human being. He's an excellent singer-songwriter, which I know you can't put that in the book, but it should have been in there. And
Remember when books used to come with CDs?
his wife's cooler and smarter than him. Shh, don't tell him that. And but one of the things I've really appreciated about his work is that he's one of those people that feels the complicity, the ethical ambiguity, the uncomfortability of things you inherit in a way that it's personal enough. He doesn't give glib answers. And in our relationship, he's constantly, at least for me, in conversations and publicly and other things, framed questions that brings more of your kind of unexamined participation in systems and assumptions to the surface than plenty of my other intelligent friends. And so I've always appreciated our relationship. It's also a lot of fun. You heard him on the PYM podcast, the last PYM podcast, and now you're going to talk to him again. So currently he teaches religion and ethics at Campbell University. Now, he did not go to Campbell University, but the greatest human on planet Earth did. And I'm not talking about myself. I'm talking about my wife, Alicia. We met there. Campbell University. Our mascot was a camel.
That makes sense.
We're the Humpers.
There you go.
There used to be, and Andrew, or Ryan, or Newsom, told me they no longer have the bumper sticker in the bookstore that said every day is hump day at Campbell University.
That's good. That's good.
No, that's awesome.
Yeah.
Like, you remember back in the 90s when they had those hats that was like white and it was stitched in small, like the name of the university, and in big letters it was stitched the mascot?
Yeah.
But ours did not say, it said Campbell University and it just said Humpers, not camels. Man.
That's those were the days, huh?
When it's a private Baptist school, they think the best of everybody. It's a place where every day's hump day, and you can purchase your humper hat in the school because you go back to your single-sex dorms, and only once a month can people of the other gender come into your dorm room. If they leave their student ID with the people at the front of the hall and leave the door open for a select amount of time. So
I was going to say something, but I'll save it.
You're passing on it. All right. Well, Campbell University was also where the greatest human being on the planet went to school, and the mother of my children. It's also the place where I drank, smoked, and had sex for the first time with my wife, because we got married in undergrad.
That's it. Yeah.
You know, I don't know if I've ever said this on the podcast, but I did the charge at my wife's ordination service. Alicia.
I know the story, yeah.
And my opening line was, I imagine it's rare that the first person you drank, smoked, and had sex with gets to speak at your ordination service, but I'm honored to be here. And a good 85% laughed.
Yeah.
Which I feel like that's high quality.
Yeah, for that crowd.
For that line. But yeah. So this is a great conversation. And before we jump into it, just know we're friends. It was an honor. You should go to theroadtoedmond.com so you can follow along with our movie Excitement. That's
Speaking
right.
of radical friendship.
Yeah. Like it's a movie about friendship. These two characters Larry and Cleo.
That's right.
They become friends, radical friends.
Mm-hmm.
So good of friends, they can, like, over the course of 90 minutes, become friends, break up, and get back together. Like every good movie that's based on a new relationship.
That's right.
In the midst of this reconciliation of friendship, new beginnings come into things, and like closure happens in other places, and other things I can't say right now because I haven't asked Dave what I'm allowed to say publicly, and I'm like I'm an oversharer. That might be what you would say.
Yeah.
Especially given I mentioned enough things about my family at this point in this episode that so don't tell Alicia I told that at the beginning in the intro. You know, sometimes she says, do you have to say everything? And I say, I don't say everything.
That's true.
Yeah. Or people would even think I'm even cooler than, imagine if I told them just how amazing you think I am.
But if you go to theroaddeadman.com, you can subscribe to the video blog and see awesome, ridiculous things happening while we're making the movie between beer camps.
Mm-hmm. Oh, yeah. And last but not least, thank you for all you people that are members of the Homebrewed community. You make this podcast possible. Your donations every month not only give you access to all sorts of stuff, community, downloads, and all that kind of thing, you also help us pay for everything.
Mm-hmm.
And justify to the rest of the people in our lives who say, why are you spending that much time doing that? That's not completely
for you. That's why.
Yeah, we're doing it for the people, but less than 1% of the people are like, we want it to happen. So if you want to support the podcast, go to homebrewedcommunity.com. And if you already do, look yourself in the mirror and say, boom shakalaka, you're rocking the planet. All right? Here's my friend, Newsom, who may or may not go by Ryan or Andrew. Hello, Homebrewed Christianity listeners. This is Tripp, and today you are going to get to hear from my friend, Ryan Andrew Newsom, who we've been friends since a long time ago, when high school absolutely. Basically is where we met. And he went to Elon and was a student with Jeffrey C. Pugh, who's been on the podcast before, and then went to div school at Wake Forest University, and then did his PhD in at Fuller Theological Seminary in theological ethics. So
that's right. That's exactly right.
And now he has his book, Radical Friendship. Oh yeah, the Politics of Communal Discernment. So it's out, and here's what you do when books like this come out. You get on the internet and you just order them. You say, I want to know about friendship. If you're against friendship, don't get this book. But if you support friendship and possibly human beings relating in ways that don't, that aren't supported by binary ideologies that breed destruction, then like I'm just saying, this is a high quality text. And, So but before we get completely off topic, Ryan, I want you to tell me about radical friendship.
Sure. Just radical friendship.
Well, I mean, like I doubt that, when you type in the word radical friendship on the internet, you get your book and Politics of Friendship by Derrida. So it's not a super popular topic. You know what I mean? And I at first thought maybe this is like pop theology and it was going to be the super friends. We're going to be like the main metaphor running through the book. That's not it at all. So where was this book idea conceived?
Yeah, I've had someone quote some sort of Michael W. Smith song to me, but I didn't know what was happening when that was happening. Absolutely. Radical friendship. I first was came to this idea, I guess, during my doctoral studies, of course, as those ideas are wont to do. And I was both reading political theorists, political theologians, political philosophers that were talking about the need for some sort of competency in a increasing situation or context in which we seem in need of that sort of thing, where we seem increasingly siloed off and divided and that kind of a way. So friendship, not in the sense of like Facebook friends or whatever. I mean, I like Facebook friends, but we don't tend to be very radical often. So that's kind of what that means in that sense. That was coupled with a sort of attention to, or my interest in, the kind of friendship that is born by Christians who were engaging the world in certain kinds of ways. So not just automatically going to church and being buddies, but trying to sort of bring to bear in the world, in each person's local context, in ways that bleed wider out, the implications of the gospel, of the kingdom of God, of the reign of God, in ways that were to them direct implications for from the gospel, but to other people, including oftentimes other Christians, were seen as radical and going against the grain. Yeah.
So, how would you describe the contemporary political religious situation that that this book is being kind of geared towards? Because there are a lot of the conversation partners that come out of the Anabaptist tradition, political organizing, and these type of things are traditions that were born, in an age not earlier, right? And now you're taking these practices and ideas and putting them in the context of our current political situation.
Yeah, absolutely. There's a real focus around the sort of 16th century, early 16th century beginnings of what people start to call at some point Anabaptists, who are rising at a certain kind of particular cultural moment, and they themselves were sort of drawing on practices and traditions and that were older than them, of course. And so you sort of see this sort of horizon sort of compiling on one another. But what I liked about that, looking in that way, was that they found themselves in the 16th century, as you well know, in a moment in which there were profound sort of tectonic shifts happening that seemed to sort of, you could make them parallel our own in various different ways if you'd like them to. And so technological shifts that make that they were being kind of reconnected in ways that they weren't before, philosophical shifts, theological shifts. One thing I paid attention to and was kind of surprised that I hadn't seen more people make this connection, but sort of political revolutionary shifts that were happening that seemed to be directly tied to these group of people, these Christians, later called Anabaptists, who sort of gathered together in groups of people. So this German Peasants' War, these sort of massive political upheavals that sort of were the sort of precipitation of what they would later claim. And so you see that as sort of ongoing, this new sort of fecund culture sort of getting created, where various sorts of Christians were arguing with one another, Anabaptisms, Protestantisms, things like that, where people were trying to figure out how to be Christian. What does it mean to be faithful to God in this new context? And that kind of paralleled for me, or it just seemed to me that there's something to be said and claimed from this tradition as well as the others as in that same moment for today, because we're facing similar kinds of moments. When I first was talking about, especially the political sorts of tectonic shifts, this was well before anything that, this was before anything that's happening right now with whatever, you know what I'm saying? So it turned out to be kind of prescient. This was before Brexit. This is Brexit. This is before, President Donald Trump, peace be upon him, was elected, things like that. So,
well, then, maybe God wanted your book to sell more and matter. So it's just like, what's a great situation? We need people asking about radical politics, so they'll read Andrew Newsom's magisterial text right here. And
if that's true, then there's more reason than ever to reject.
Bring on 45. So in the book, you spend some time kind of describing how the assumptions we have today about liberal politics or neoliberal politics and market forces and these type of things just have foundational assumptions that are problematic if we're wanting to develop neighborliness, communities that care and friendship and these type of things. Could you spell that out a bit? Because I think one of the challenges progressive politics has in general, especially when it's coming out of a religious context, is the way in which the foundational assumptions of our government, the power it has, the way we structure things, are just not even noticed. They're just assumed. It's just like the water of being an American Christian assumes these type of structures. And I wonder, like, when was it that you first noticed them and started to see them and find them problematic? Because, short of already being down for the Anabaptists, they might be thinking, man, this is why you just should not read Menno Simons and James McClendon's problematic, because look what happens if you read it too closely. Tell us about neoliberalism. And you're supposed to cut me off and just start talking here, Ryan. You're just rubbing your beard. I want you all to know, y'all won't see this, but he just sitting here rubbing his beard, smiling.
I love it. I'm laughing at myself. It is a gift exchange, right? Like what I'm trying to, the sort of creative tensions I'm trying to create. This isn't just like a book about, although I'm very interested in communal discernment as in church practice. It's not just like an unpacking. That's mostly what you find if you Amazon, Google, whatever. Discernment. It's sort of like kind of techniques for how to do this in your churches, which are helpful, I'm sure. But this is not that. It's sort of a gift exchange too with critiques of neoliberalism that Anabaptists themselves haven't been attentive to, or have some. There's some folks who have, or haven't like noticed the sort of even deeper implications that they have in this practice that they're engaging. So, reducing everything down to the sort of fungibility. So, it's sort of, when I think about it in terms as far out as I can go, it's sort of a sort of combination of hyper individualism with economic, the logic of capitalism economics sort of so coloring the way you think that it colors the way you look at the world. So it's much closer to what many theologians call principalities and powers than it is a sort of a way of structuring reality. You don't even notice that you see the world in terms of what's the word I'm looking for? Not gifted, not the opposite of gift. Oh gosh. Everything is sort of commodified and sort of viewed in that sort of lens. So I don't know, you think about something like what are the sort of concerns that are talked about when you hear people at the normal kind of national level debating something like healthcare? What are the sort of concerns that are brought up? What are the sort of what is the frame in which that debate is had, even on the like progressive side? There's a sense in which what you need to do in some cases is to sort of talk about that in certain kinds of terms, economic particularly, that will make sense to people. And so that's kind of it. It's sort of the reduction down to everything ultimately coming back to economic forces. I had a family member one time when I was growing up say, deeply fundamentalist Christian, weirdly enough, say, money makes the world go round. Everyone knows that ultimately. And there was sort of no contradiction whatsoever in the sort of that sort of statement, which seems to me on its face now blatantly idolatrous, and a vision that, a very kind of modern evangelical picture of what it means to be Christian. I don't know the first time I noticed. Sorry. Oh,
no. I was just saying, like, I think when neoliberalism is a term that gets thrown around a lot, and one of the ways of kind of thinking it through, at least for me, has been the fact that in the later 20th century and into today, there was basically the 19th century capitalism made a comeback, right? So then we have moves in across the West to greater privatization. You do fiscal austerity to solve problems. You go to deregulation, create free trade agreements, right? So like the Clintons represent neoliberal, even though traditionally these ideas are more conservative, that once you get the Democratic Party assuming that to steward the country means to give the market, which will do good and beneficial things, minimal guidance and maximum freedom. And so deregulation, free trade agreements, you state as a goal, like spending less as a government, right? Like, and that the private sector is an ideal place. So you like the antipathy that comes in about being a government worker versus a private worker and all that kind of stuff. You can see it in tax policies where you get taxed less if you don't even work, but just make money off money making money. But teachers unions, they get paid $40,000 a year, but they got retirement plan, like stuff like that. And this is not just right wingers. This is just called the assumptions you make if you are a steward to power is that the market is the best means to doing these things. And when the political conversation is such that all those assumptions are there, then anything sounds radical that's like even just like basic Keynesian economics is radical, which just means like, when when the market's down, you actually put money in infrastructure or a works program or whatever, right? Like you spend when things are bad.
Yeah.
So I mean, I say that just because I think, one of the things almost everyone knows if the market is the place that you primarily connect to your neighbor and the poor and your country is in a context that is zero sum. Like you are competing against each other.
Yeah.
And as much as you might want to say, oh, well, when the pie grows, everyone's piece is bigger. Yeah, but it's growing in a competition where you just have to trust that the well-being of your neighbor is being met when you try to demolish them.
Yes. So there's built-in commitments, both anthropological about human nature and about God. I mean, that's one of my big things that even if people don't recognize that explicitly, there are commitments that are political, individual, about what humans are and about God, about the ultimate nature of reality that are built into that way of engaging that makes the neighbor unseeable or something. Like it becomes a revolution, exactly as you said. It becomes kind of a revolutionary act to like get together in something like, I mean, you're from North Carolina, like unions. Like I talk to my friends from Minnesota and New York and stuff. I didn't grow up with that. I live in a right to work. I grew up in a right to work state, which
California is a right to work state,
which that's the most hilarious name for something I've ever heard. So, just the idea of talking about, hey, or even just mentioning to like friends of mine or family members who are workers, like, hey, just because somebody is a small business owner, they might be great, but they might not be. And there's no necessary, they're not necessarily out for your best interests. That's kind of what it comes down to. Like, where's the sort of receptivity focused? Where is the sort of main interest of these groups? So, absolutely, this goes across the board, and I think you saw that in the last election as well. But it's not as tied. So, talking in these ways is not as tied to the sort of electoral theater that comes along with every 4 years. And I should definitely stress every 4 years. It's not like nobody cares about local elections, right? So, it's not as tied to that theater, and so it's not as sexy, and so then it sort of is either seen as weird or incomprehensible or something, because the way that Sheldon Wolin, this radical democratic philosopher I rely on a lot, would say is that it's the actual sphere of what's properly political that is being lost. So what we're talking about here is that basically actual politics in the sense of people with true deep differences engaging with one another without negating the differences or saying everything goes or saying just listen and all will be all right. Like that's the sort of thing that's getting ebbed away in favor of economics and stuff like that. Yeah.
So maybe unpack, tell us a little bit about Sheldon. I know, I remember the time the interview Chris Hedges did with him. I don't know if you've ever seen that. It's pretty amazing. They talk for like 2 hours.
Yeah. Like, I don't know who besides like me and someone else would have the time to.
Well, if you use YouTube, you can turn it on triple speed and they just get going. Oh yeah. But he had a book called Democracy Incorporated, isn't it? Okay. Yeah. And in there, I think like one of the challenges that he puts clear, you obviously have read more of him than me, but he really challenges whether or not capitalism and democracy are made to go together, right? And I think that is an assumption at the heart of American Christianity, that Christianity, capitalism, and our nation state as a democracy, that this is the best glove human beings have ever found, right? If you want to see what a glove fit to a hand looks like, then you take nation states that are democracies, throw in some Jesus and some free markets, and that glove does fit. So there shall be no acquitting.
You've read the Parable of the Talents, right? I mean, come on.
Yeah. So try to convince us that you aren't just trying to ruin Christianity, America, and even oppress poor people. Because where would you rather live? Like, could the world do any better than the U.S. of A? Huh?
Well, there's no reason. I certainly agree. There's no reason I don't find any reason to pretend that's not true. That last part, I should say, is that that there's not goods involved in the United States that are actual and real. So what Wolin and these folks like this are getting at is that, does that therefore mean that everything is hunky dory, right? Is it possible that there are actual very true goods that are associated with living in the United States of America, but that nonetheless there's like termites in the house or something? And I don't know. It just seems quite evident to me that there's termites in the house right now, that maybe I hadn't noticed 8 years ago, but I sure see them now. What they're trying to do is, Wolin points out a lot of his work is to show that when we talk about the American experiment, by which he means the United States, of course, starting in the 18th century. And that's got its own assumptions and problems too. There's multiple voices going on here. So when people talk about what is the United States, it's never been a monolithic thing. There's always been a sort of ongoing argument with different sort of voices and sides of the thing. So one of the things he does is he goes back to the Philadelphia Convention, and he shows that like there are multiple sort of interests at play there, and they're not all, and in fact, most of them are explicitly at best wary of, and if not outright hostile towards, the idea of a democratically competent, engaged people. They were all aristocrats pretty much, and they owned other humans, and they were convinced that if we actually let people be democratically competent, what do we know? Well, they will certainly come for our stuff. So voted out or otherwise. And so one of the things he's trying to do is that there is not the vision of what's good for the United States is you got to ask whose vision of the United States, right? And there's always been compete. So one of the things that's happened since like Reagan probably is that kind of conversation is now kind of gone. So Wolin says like the last sort of victory here is that there's just an amnesia that even this conversation even was had, right? That conversation's gone now. We've forgotten it happened. So in theory, I'm already interested in that as a person. As a Christian, I was interested in and am interested in that question because I already came at the question with the assumption that the kingdom of God was a spiritual, personal, and social, political thing that Jesus is talking about and trying to embody and incarnate, both in the first century and on through the ages. So I already have a sort of disposition to prefer I don't know, visions of things that would sort of stay on the underside, as it were. So anybody who's going to start talking about critiquing people in power at the behest of the people who are on the underside, I'm kind of down with that, because Jesus talks a lot, it seems to me, about sort of kind of people being caught up in systems. That's the other thing that's quite important to notice. It's not like people are bad. People don't see, including myself, all the ways in which we are caught up in these things. And so like, it's not like how evil is everybody or something. It's a matter like, this is just exactly as you put it, the water we're swimming in. And so as a Christian, I'm just interested in those sorts of questions, bringing those in tension. They're not the same, but they have things to say to one another, I think.
Well, and one of the things, and you talk about it in the book, getting at that is his concept of inverted totalitarianism. And in at least the way I understood it when you described it, it meant that there's a sense in where the government, in our democratic government, is getting, it's becoming totalitarian from the market up, right? Like instead of like this big figure coming in, the economy comes to, corporations have so corrupted the democratic process, and that the decision-making powers of the government are that you're not held accountable to the actual well-being of the community, the environment, the people you serve. It's to a gerrymandered district where you can purchase who's going to win. The 90% of the seats are basically set which party's going to get it, and special interests can get to them, so that when decisions are being made that affect certain markets or things, that economy will trump politics because it actually trumps the people in the entire process. So for just yesterday, Trump's decided that air traffic control should be privatized. That seems like the worst idea I've ever heard in my life. Do you want people to, quote, more efficiently do air traffic control? No, it should not be making money. I want air traffic control to be a cesspool of overspending, so that you aren't like, we're going to let we got these fancy new contraptions. One guy sitting in a booth with some computers is better than 14 people that know what they're doing. No, it shouldn't be. But no one, it wasn't like on TV, people were like, yeah, this is called inverted totalitarianism, where the assumption of everyone in the room is that the market clearly will do it better and cares more about all the people. The only good thing about air traffic control being privatized is rich people fly. That is the only reason I can think of that it won't go horribly wrong. Because if it was just air traffic control for middle class and under, we're screwed. You got to make sure there's not too many private planes. But that logic where the people that are the democracy is no longer the dominant, the free market of ideas, and democratic influence is not the decision maker. The market owns the political policy, and it's just switched right in our faces. So it's this inverted totalitarianism. All the way down to, the country has all these natural resources. We should sell them. No, whoever said this is a good idea? I don't remember a vote that's screw state parks. That, if I thought we ran on that, but you'll even see Democrats. Well, and it's nuts. I got a little venti.
No, it's good. So the way in which the sort of solution doesn't help that problem is when you say, no, we need to defend our national commodities or something like that. And so you're still speaking about creation as if it's some sort of external thing that in principle you might want to mine, and so, yeah, the inverted totalitarianism bit of it is that all happens in the sense of maybe you see it and you think, well, there's nothing I can do about this. There's nothing I can do about this. And the things keep coming and coming and coming and coming and coming. That did not start in January 2017, or February, whenever. That's been going on for a while. But the sense of there's nothing I can do about it, or even better, from the position of somebody who's in power, you don't even recognize it's happening. So much better than a sort of boot on the face is a face that doesn't notice the boot. Mm-hmm. If that makes sense. So, or maybe kisses it and gives it a little lick. Much better is a population that doesn't see this sort of thing happening, and in the worst of cases has a sort of colonized consciousness that welcomes it and sort of gives theological defenses. For protect our freedom and access to goods and stuff, and we just start giving away freedom, and I think there is that sense that when our primary drives are commodities,
And the heartbeat of our culture is the cultivation of desires that will never be fulfilled, but will be chased after through consumer practices. Then it shouldn't surprise you then that The Apprentice is in the White House. Like it. Yeah. I did surprise me, but I guess it shouldn't have, which is why I think it was just so that your book would sell more. God was like, look, we need to help radical friendship out, bringing in 45. Yeah. So when we think of this situation,
then reject that. Then that God should not be talked about ever.
So if you're against that God, you should also get the book.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah. So maybe you could say, like, when you are hanging out with your theological ethics friends, and then they are like reading the subtitle of your book, Politics of Communal Discernment. Yeah. What are the other kind of theological responses to the contemporary political scene that you like? That's nice, but I prefer my other thing. But like, what are the major conversation partners or the other live options that at least acknowledge the problem that you're in and want to talk about civic engagement, church engagement, and that kind of thing?
Yeah, so absolutely. There's groups that recognize these problems with political liberalism, neoliberalism, theologians, I should say, that they see those issues, and so they're going to try to work within it. And so there's a deep strain within certain parts a good strain within certain theological ethical voices. I trace them typically back to Augustine, or it was like traditions of Augustine that would say something like, we need to engage, follow something like a civic liberalism or something like that. Like, we need to, this is not good. This is not ideal, but we've got what we've got. And it doesn't do us any good to sit around, and we don't have another theoretical option available. And so what we can't just say it's all good and hunky dory and let's just inhabit it perfectly, happily. So what we need to do is instead try to find ways to inhabit it as it is, and kind of direct it from within towards more distant good. I mean, distant in the sort of, both kind of other kinds of ends, which it's deeply, it's so honest, and there's such an appeal to that to me. I mean, it makes sense in a lot of ways. And the deepest part that's true about it is there isn't an escape. That is absolutely true. That we're in this moment. We're not going to be in any other moment. Sitting around and saying, I wish neoliberalism weren't so true. That doesn't do anything. That's a real option. That's a real option. Another one would be something like globalization's going on now. So all this talk about the problem of these various individual nation states being a thing, globalization will ultimately fix that, because it will sort of rise to a level above at which we're talking. I don't think that's as convincing at all, because that just seems to me just a sort of next sort of emergent level of the same sorts of problems, insofar as they emerge from the same soil. So I'm sympathetic to that. I just think that there needs to be a sort of yes and there, or a no and, or whatever, a sense in which there's space for a deeper level critique that tries to imagine possibilities that go beyond where we currently are, even as we acknowledge that there's nowhere that this is the water in which we're all going to be swimming. So the sort of false choice that gets presented is sort of, I think, sometimes like, there's not going to be an escape to this, therefore you might as well acquiesce. I mean, that's sort of implied a lot of the time. Certainly somebody who says the word Anabaptist to certain Christians, that just automatically pops up, for good reason in a lot of cases. But that need not be the case.
So one of the things that, I think like today, probably like Niebuhr is the most famous like example of the Augustinian option, right? Like of like recognizing the inherent brokenness of humans and their ability to like double down on brokenness when they work together to do much. So that kind of like never expect an institution to be more moral than you and your best friend when no one's around. But to me, I feel like one of the tensions, it reminds me of that scene in Life of Brian where they're planning the revolution against Rome, and and it gets to the end, and then Reg is like, all right, what apart from better sanitation and medicine and education and irrigation and public health and roads and a fresh water system and baths and public order, what have the Romans done for us? Right? I feel like that's the normal response to Anabaptists is that they're the ones that are sitting there, like in a tenured job at a university that is, all their students are getting scholarships from neoliberal companies that are they're wanting to get arts degrees where they're going to get trust funds from successful bankers to do it. Like, I feel like part of the difficulty, right, is the very places where prophetic critique could go to the system are the ones in some sense are funded by it. So you get stuck there going like, well, apart from the medicine and the baths and the aqueducts, like, and all that, what have the Romans done for us? So, yeah. So like, how do you kind of, how do you see friendship as, the way you see relationships as a way to both acknowledge like our stuckness where we are and instead of, swinging for the theory fence, which is really fun to do as an academic, you kind of say like, no, like bring your eyes down to where you are and the people in front of you. To me, that seems, it made me not want to just roll my eyes like I like to do it Anabaptists. I like just like, oh.
Yeah. Again, probably well earned in a lot of cases. So, I go in at one point, one of the chapter, I can't remember which, but it is dedicated kind of to untangling this question. I mean, kind of implicitly about practices and our inhabitation of the world that we're in, and not trying to get out of this, but also with kind of like in a Foucaultian way, like there's no outside. That doesn't mean there's no better way to be inside. And so, the way I think about it and talk about it is, and he also goes on to say it's in smaller groups of association towards the end of his life, kind of towards the margins of society, where best the competencies are going to be made possible, where you can give witness back to a system in which you are still a part of. There's no purity here, but that you're not also just give. So I kind of try to. My internet connection is unstable. Okay. Describe Jim McClendon, this guy, he's an Anabaptist sort of adjacent theologian, talks about picturing society in terms of interwoven counter practices or practices that interweave with one another. And he sort of presents this picture of a society that is complex and that is deeply interwoven all the way up and all the way down. And so the question no longer becomes for someone like him, if you follow his analysis, like, should we participate or should we not? The question is, because that's just a bad question right from the start. And so some of the debates in previous eras were sort of set by this picture of like participation or non-participation, and like people divided up. And most people, rightly said, well, I'm going to choose participation, of course. It's a sense of like, there's interwovenness in the ways that society is pointed out. In fact, precisely the image of society is like this whole that you either wholesale participate in or wholesale not is kind of born of these inheritances that we were talking about earlier. And so finding the places in which these practices in which that you can say kind of yes to or whatever, participate in, as a Christian, and I mean that like as robustly as I can, not just say the word Jesus a lot, but like that's kind of what I would get at with that. The question of yes or no, full yes or no, it's always a kind of both, and that kind of question is going to shift and change as the context changes, depending on where we are. Yeah. Well,
you kind of mentioned one of the sections I underlined. In the book, you said that, even when it's avoided or wished away, power is present. Ignoring it only leaves us blind to its function. As soon as there exists a political body, constitutive practices must emerge. And then you go on and describe that bit about Foucault, that power is always already there, but power doesn't just have to be power over. And that in those smaller communities of association, of different types of power can emerge from within. And I think that, like, that's a quite nerdy idea, but it's really an answer to something lots of progressive Christians ask in different ways, right? So the number of people in the last few years who got woke and had no idea about any of it before, or when post 9/11, when you have the like giant Christian Islamophobia march to war, or you become aware of just how blind our society is to systemic economic oppression of rural poor whites, and that even they won't acknowledge the patterns of oppression for like rural white people, and because they got to preserve some myth that is connected to their belief they still have some privilege that they don't even have. Like, it's really nuts, right? Like, you start to see all these ways that there are just systems of injustice and mythologies that we all have internalized and believed in different ways, and then you start to become aware of it, and be it nationalism or racism, patriarchy, and this type of stuff, and then you just feel complicit and you feel gross, and you're like, so what do I do? Right? Like, you're like, what do I do? And if you don't have kids yet and don't need health insurance or something, then you do something really crazy. But after you move out of the commune or or whatnot, like, most people that are part of the body of Christ that can start to see these historic injustices also. Right, I realize, like, they're waking up to already being in the system, right? Like, the power is always already present, and it's so easy just to feel burnout or opt out, or like wanting to go back into the matrix and eat fake steak and never know that you were there. So like, describe the way, like, this practice of discernment is an invitation to resist just giving up because you don't see any hope, and or just like learning to tolerate the ugly.
I like that. Yeah. So, there's not going to be, if we're dealing with these systems that have a long history, the idea there's going to be a quick, easy, either theoretical fix or a quick, easy, even political fix is not. That's a illusion we need to shed now. So part of what I like about the practice of communal discernment as it has haunted the Anabaptist tradition is its willingness to say no to the temptation that I have to have certainty about what to do next before I can try to live faithfully in this moment. At its best. So the idea of, like, we're not going to get some sort of quick solution to these issues. We shouldn't want that because that's sort of a denial of it. That's a very non-realist. It's very kind of non-historical in a way. So it's kind of finding spaces where you come together with people both in the church and absolutely, imperatively, with people of all other sorts of convictional backgrounds and persuasions or whatever, where you are taking the time to hear and listen well to each other, and not in a sort of glib way, but like in an actual sort of way where you're sort of seeing each other and engaging in these sort of encounters with one another that get at something, like laying down roots that are a little bit deeper than what we have right now. That kind of can allow perhaps the sort of sense of, like, the person who is the white poor person in the countryside or whatever, and my people that but are still clinging to this sense of superiority because at least I'm not X, Y, or Z. At least I'm not black, right? Which is a very purposely cultivated thing in the especially in the Reconstruction era, American South. That was real, and it was to break up a fusion that was being born of poor white farmers and black Republicans, and white Democrats at the time were afraid of it. And so they said, hey, this race thing's pretty good at keeping people non-woke, so they're keeping people dead asleep. So, it's a I can't quite remember the question, but I'm just thinking out loud. It's just, this is it's the idea of imagining the kinds of spaces where people can start to get out, kind of undo or untangle the sorts of knots that we find. It's not just out there; it's in us, right? It's in me. So it involves very much personal work as much as it does, and interpersonal work as it does these big. So like you can talk about these big structural things, and they're important to talk about. But the real rub is like following someone like Bourdieu. Like these things are sort of made body in and with me, and so that kind of work has to happen. We have to find these kinds of spaces, otherwise we're just screwed.
So maybe tell us a story of a time communal discernment was a solution to something, or it created openness that the participants before would have said, "Really, you're going to broach that? You're going to go there? Why would you do that?" Yeah.
Yeah, so one of my favorite stories, but in that way, is this guy, C.P. Ellis, and this woman, Ann Atwater. It's a kind of locally famous story in the Triangle in North Carolina. There's this group of people in Durham in the 70s, and they were involved with the question of how to get local. So some federal funds were used to try to get local municipalities to enforce Brown versus Board of Education. Like it was already the law of the land, but nobody was doing it, or they're shuffling their feet. They're trying to give their family time to go find the local private Christian school. And so, in Durham, there was
the private Christian schools were already integrated, is what you're saying.
Yeah, maybe. I'm going to not say the things I'm thinking. So, there is this, in Durham, these funds were used to create something called a charrette, which was basically meant to be a local community discernment process led by this dude from Shaw being the university where, SNCC, the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Commission, first got going, committee got going with, Born of Ella Baker and other folks. And so there's a reason I think that this guy is connected to Shaw. So we got these people together in Durham, local civic leaders, that were affected by what was happening in the public schools. And this included a guy named C.P. Ellis, who was the head of the local KKK and was concerned with the quality of the schools in Durham, and a woman named Ann Atwater, who was a local black neighborhood activist kind of a person. And over a long period of time, months, and based on certain kinds of leadership that were involved in these meetings, both sort of discernment of a problem that has wider structural, on one level, you're talking about desegregation and integration of public schools. But they didn't sit down and start talking about desegregation or the integration of public schools, because that was never going to get you anywhere. There's too much sort of ideological baggage that prevented people from talking. What they talked about was the quality of Durham's schools in particular. And at first it was terrible, but over time they started to realize, in particular C.P. Ellis, the white man, that what he had assumed was totally different sort of problems ended up being his problem, his plight, the plight of his people were the same. And a friendship sort of bore out of this process that started in deep animosity. So it wasn't pretty, and that's not some sort of formula. That's it. There's no formula to this. It's not like it's sort of, well, everybody should just get there and start talking. Like, not necessarily, but there's more of a chance of that. People are engaged levels, and I should note, it's not like they got together and just everything was, everything anyone said was accepted. There was kind of what one guy calls blocking took place when C.P. Ellis would say something that was blatantly, racist, as he did. I mean, it's not like neither did they cut off the conversation and shun him or something, but nor did they just go, hey, that's cool, man. There was a sort of there was a sort of saying a firm no, but also sort of continuing in discernment. So there's a lot more patience on one side than the other. So that's one example that I think of a lot. Anna Atwater just died a couple years ago, maybe 1 year ago. She lived a while, but absolutely. Yeah. So that's sort of like a picture of the kind of thing I was thinking of.
Well, in the book, you talk about how a part of communal discernment is that like the progress that can be made is actually made by walking, and that most ways of solving a problem, there's a dice roll in it, and a lot of times, like how you make a decision is like, what is it that you're betting on here? Mm-hmm. And as a Christian, I don't think it should be odd that like we're betting that when human beings who before the name had a face to it and a meal was connected, you couldn't see a way past something. It comes if you just keep showing up and acknowledging the dignity and humanity of the other. In the midst of that, you could be honest. There can be disagreements. You can get to know each other, and transformation happens because you tend not to ruin your friends' lives on purpose, right? Like even the heathens can do that. So, and why I think that's important is like you talk about the way friendship emerges out of that, and I think people see it. The crazy part is this is also politics. Right. And it seems like so opposite of politics that today, right? Like you can't even, the worst thing Chris Christie did was tell someone that saved people's lives in his state, thank you. They were like, he hugged him. Oh no. So, but this practice, right, wasn't initially born as a way of solving political problems. It kind of came out of the life of religious communities that were minority religious communities in the Reformation. And I wonder if which would be scarier, a church that wants to have a fight, fire a bunch of people and split doing this, or beginning it with the local Trump organizer in your in your zip code. Which one? Like if you were going to go. If they're like let's bring Ryan in. The good Dr. Newson's going to help us do some stuff here. You either want to go to a splitting, backstabbing, blind carbon copying church split, or you're gonna develop some friendships with Trump organizers and Bernie bros. Like which one? Where do you see?
Which would be more scarier?
Yeah.
The church.
Exactly. I swear, like the church stuff, it is straight up scary. When you read it, it's like, oh, it's so great. I'm glad other people do that.
Well, I think oftentimes what we see and you see, it doesn't get tried. Well, I kind of tweaked this famous little Chesterton aphorism. It was like, it's not like it gets tried and found wanting in churches. It basically just found difficult and scary and left untried. And then when people try to engage, the only time Baptists, big B Baptists, talk about communal discernment anything is about stuff that's almost nonsense. And then if we ever get down to like deep level kinds of conversations, we don't have those sort of like muscles to do it well. So it's more like a state of mutual, don't talk about this kind of thing. Like, I know that person's, I know we disagree profoundly, we voted differently, whatever, but I don't want to talk about those sorts of, like, so part of, I think what happens in churches is that it doesn't get, although it's right there in the New Testament, I mean, you see it, and it's precisely the means by which some of unity rather than uniformity is kind of manifest in the New Testament witness. That's both diverse, but also they're sort of discerning out witness to Jesus in these various ways. So what you see is I think we've let it sit for a long time. We don't want to call some Jerusalem Council and talk about what do you do about Gentile inclusion. But that also assumes theological convictions about God still speaking, God saying things that might go beyond a wooden adherence to what's in the text, that isn't necessarily a part of some Christian traditions. And so it's hard to do it well in a tradition in which you don't already have a commitment to the canonic lordship of Jesus, God speaking in a unique, weird way when two or three people gather and have these weird, hard conversations. If you're just a part of some megachurch and then you decide somehow, I don't know why, but they decided somehow I'm going to relinquish some of my authoritarian control over this basically Christian capitalist organization and let this thing happen, I don't think it would go well at all. But that's precisely because you haven't fostered there's theological convictions that are sort of missing from letting that go well. And so in the Bernie bros versus the, I don't know, Trump bros, is that a thing? In that meeting, there might be more of a willingness to sort of talk about, like I've had conversations with Trump supporters I'm not a Trump supporter, that we've got a lot of move forward on a lot of ground about critiques of things in a way that, the church. I mean, I've seen it. There's reasons it goes wrong. It can go wrong. There's risks, and when it goes wrong, it might go nasty wrong. So there's reasons why people avoid the practice. Yeah.
Well, I mean, is part of it, like, at least in politics, that there's another side that completely disagrees with you is already acknowledged, but for a religious community, part of it's kind of it has a wonderful myth of innocence and purity where biblical Christianity or creedal Christianity or whatever adjective means we should all be the same is there. So just the acknowledgement of another form of life that would locate itself as Christian just creeps you out.
Yes.
And I mean, that's like, honestly, like it's way worse in the South than it is not in the South because you don't have, in California, there's not an assumption that every Baptist church around there wishes it was still in charge of everything, right? Like that, there's not a lot of culture dominance that lingers around. And so just, it's different. It's different here, but, I mean, you still get everything you get in congregations because that's what they like to do. But, I wonder, because one of the things that I don't quite get, and it makes less sense to me after moving out here, is like how hung up people get around like sexuality stuff and the church, because I mean, short of changes in human culture and society, parting ways with how trends have always worked throughout known history, in 30 years, your grandkids are going to giggle that we were hung up on this.
Oh, definitely.
And also, like human beings, there's not been, or in any other species we track, huge fluctuations except in environmental crises where it becomes necessary for an uptick in same-sex attraction. Like there's not like a secret thing where if you say a lesbian can go to your church, all your daughters become lesbians. Like that's just not how it works. I don't get that. And I've never lost sleep talking with anyone who's like, oh, I just want to have like biblical marriages. And I'm like, well, not all biblical marriages. You by biblical marriage, you mean 1950s. So, but it's all good.
Polygamy, come on, man.
Yeah. Well, that's the Old Testament. They couldn't have pepperoni pizza then either. And, so like, let's imagine like an issue like that where the church basically would rather, let everyone know we're not talking about it at all because we know there's different opinions. So you just like dodge talking, or we're just going to tell you what the answer is in hopes that you figure it out and leave. Like, what in the world? I don't get it. Like, and Jesus was single. That's the other thing. A single dude who rolled with 12 men and was funded by rich women. Like,
yeah, I think, how can I think you're right on. I think that there are expressions of Christianity that cannot acknowledge the diversity of what you see as people, communities of people and individuals responding to God in the New Testament itself or in ongoing. So the sort of idea that what gives rise to whatever competence we might gain in any particular moment is both contextual, also gospel, but also there can be divergences and diversity in that. It's not anything goes, right? But there is diversity in that. There's some folks that is just not going to be, ironically, given that there's, if you've ever checked out the New Testament, I don't know if you've read it, it's not like some sort of written, it doesn't look like it's written by some sort of single hand writing a singular, just go ahead and give me the formula if that's what I'm just supposed to check off on.
Then why is it all in the same font? Have you thought about that?
I'm laughing because I've heard similar, but that's not far off. So there's a group of folks that just, they're not, it's a different, it is born of different theological convictions about who God is, what it means to follow after, to be faithful to God. After we're in this moment where in Jesus, these things, we're kind of in this now moment, this kind of messianic moment where we're all our sort of set answers. That's what you see in the New Testament, I think, is you see a bunch of people that they're all the conceptions and all the frameworks are just blown up. And they're sort of like working to figure that stuff back out together. And so that there could be a diversity. There was a sort of implicit faith that if we gather and move towards one another, oriented around these Hebrew scriptures, that that Jesus will be present, that the presence of God will be present. You see in the the Jewish time period, the same moment in like the Perk of Vote, you see similar sorts of affirmations about Torah when people gather together. So there's that's an ancient sort of inclination or whatever, that there's some folks that are not going to be able to down it because they've already got all the answers down. Like you don't need to engage in a practice of communal discernment about what to do if you've already know what you need to do, if you already got all the answers set and down. So in a weird way, commitment to communal discernment implies, in as much as it done well, implies God on the move. It implies not being completely certain about where you're going or where we should go 3, 4, 5 steps down the road. It also opens up the space for patience, for dissent, because as you look back, that the voice that was the minority voice in the community, it turned out to be right over time, or more people came to agree with that.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I'm saying? So that's what I see. I see in conversations about the LGBTQ community, fear. I don't see people engaging in these conversations and then coming to certain kinds of conclusions insofar as people are rejecting of that. I see communities that are, and I've experienced that, people who are fearful of even having the conversation, as if they know that might open up space for something different. And power dynamics and financial things come back into play for that as well, because Niebuhr's right about that. Institutions are very prone to being ultimately interested in self survival. That's a real thing, right?
Well, so as someone who's not very good at being a Peace Church member, maybe you can talk me. Well, I'll speak in hypotheticals. Talk me off the ledge. Let's imagine there was a very large evangelical institution, and this very large evangelical institution, it did something. I don't know. Maybe it educated large numbers of clergy, and in this evangelical institution, there are a lot of people let's just call them tenured faculty. That tends to mean they have a very sound employment. Everything they want to write ends up getting published. They are given a beautiful opportunity to shape thousands of students during their tenure who will occupy pulpits, lead all sorts of ministries, and then some will go on, could be work with Oprah. You won't acknowledge them in public, but like that could have happened. Something like that. And let's say that this group, like on the DL, they take votes and they're like, well, what do you think about pick any topic, homosexuality? And you realize when you look at the numbers that this is them telling their employer. Half of them are like, yeah, I'm down. Now, you could never find any of them to say any of this in public unless it was after I told them we stopped recording. I mean, you, like, hypothetically speaking, there's like, we're thinking about it. Now, see, that was why I think sometimes when we say discernment or like think it through, all it is dodging. Discernment is sometimes code for that power over staying in place.
Absolutely.
Right. And for those of us who have what happens like post discernment, right? Like where you feel, as a theologian and ethicist, that it's not appropriate to sit as if I'm actually opening to changing my mind. I would actually like just to discern with you long enough that you don't say things so teenagers that are gay in your congregation commit suicide. That's actually what I would like to discern with you. That it's dumb for you to say this because people actually hurt each other. And if the way you are talking about anyone leads to them taking their own life, then you have not preached the gospel and you're a failure, right? Like that's what I'd like to say. And so like, to me, the question around sexuality is one of those for evangelicals that the discernment thing, I don't know, like, is discerning the thing to do, or is the fact that maybe it's like a communication logjam where most evangelicals that aren't fundamentalists will, off the record, go, yeah, there's nothing about the Bible that makes you have to say marriage between a man and a woman. And yeah, we'll eventually get around to being more open. And, oh, well, maybe I'm open but not affirming, because that makes sense. Right. So like thinking of like that issue in the tension is there, what do you advise? Because this stuff just frustrates me.
Oh, I mean, I'm with you. So one thing immediately there's discernment and there's discernment, you know.
It's like Levinas. There's the face and then there's the face.
That's right. Yeah. Big D and little d. And so don't take that any further. So,
so you're saying that if discernment is a means of continuing to lock in the oppression of our LGBTQ friends, that's called the big D, and you should be against it.
Yeah. Well, you know, I'm thinking of like Martin Luther King when he wrote his letter from Birmingham jail, and he says, you know, patience, patience, patience. And everyone knows, or I know, that most people have been saying patience, they really mean never, or they mean forever. Wait means basically never. And so, but at the same time, there were folks working with SNCC at the same time that would say that patience is of a different sort, is precisely what is needed to bring about sort of changes in the South that we need. And so there was patience and there was patience, you know, there was patience from people in power who were using the rhetoric of patience to stop a conversation or action from happening because it was too disruptive. And that was the rhetoric about Martin Luther King. This is disruptive. And which he said, yeah, of course. Yeah, I'm trying to disrupt something. And the same with discernment. There's people who are calling for the need for discernment in a hypothetical evangelical institution, as you're talking about, that are coming from the student body or from below or whatever, or from alumni, that are saying we need to discern on this issue because we're not down. I mean, it's born of people saying are not down with the program. And then there's people from the top who are going to say, well, we need to have discernment, but what they really are saying is we don't want to have this conversation, or we're going to have it up here. I'm using my fingers above my head, but you're not invited to the table until we've already decided what the answer is going to be. That we like communal discernment is meant to be at its best always a practice of engaging where you don't the goal isn't set before you come to the table at it. So that's the one thing I thought of. One would be my convictions about that quote issue came from a long process of discernment itself. And so it's not as if I get outside of the question of discerning with other groups of people by my conclusions that I now have about being open and affirming, right? Like that's not separated for me. That came about precisely by being in these kinds of conversations with other Christians around scripture and all the rest, right? So it's not like that conviction just dropped from the sky into my head. That came about from these other conversations. That's the other thing I think there's a sense in which even so, the sort of hard discipline of refusing to dehumanize, refusing to exclude, hard shun. I don't like the idea of the practice of shunning. I say that pretty explicitly in the book. It's like this shunning. That's part of what happens is people assume that what you're talking about is shunning whoever you disagree with, and that's wrong too. I don't think you see any sort of great warrants for that in the Bible. You get like tax collector treatment, but I don't know. Jesus says at the end of Matthew 18, Jesus says treat the person who's been loosed as like a tax collector to you, but the rest of the Gospel of Matthew, Jesus is hanging out with tax collectors. So it's not like what he means by that, I don't think, is just sort of, dust your feet off. And so the sort of the rub or the pain of it is that I still feel called in this thing that I've come to a conviction on to do the sort of work of trying to be in discerning relationships with these people who might not want it. And so what might ultimately happen, what happened to the Anabaptists in the 16th century was that they didn't initially separate out from the people in Zurich. They were separated from because the people in Zurich said, we don't want to talk to you anymore. Like, you are being annoying. Quit bringing up this issue. And so that might be what the calling is, right? Continue to be annoying on it. It's certainly not to preach the gospel in hushed tones. It's certainly not to say what you have discerned about that quote issue as quietly or something. But I definitely feel tension because it's particularly on that, there's these kind of things where, I'm convinced by Brueggemann on that one though, and certain other sort of hot button topics where the more you talk with people that are afraid on that one, and I see it as afraid, it doesn't seem to be about, it's not like the exegesis of Arkansokos or whatever. Like, it's not like some sort of, what's the tittle in Greek? And that's not what the issue is. There's a more deep sense, I think Brueggemann talks about at one point, is a more deep sense of unease about the world, and the world's not what we thought it was going to be. And on that, I'm with them. I just think he says all that issue and all that fear and all that disease gets sort of dumped on this. Mm-hmm. So I think in a weird way, maybe the sort of practice of discernment could sort of allow us to continue to unearth that as a thing. Does that make sense?
No, I think so. I remember him talking about the role like involuntary disgust plays in it. That when something is like not on your menu and it grosses you out. It's like a vegan at a rib festival. Then like it's not like you're thinking. You're just like, yeah. Why are all these people eating ribs?
But it's a rib. Yeah. It's not like a patty or something. I'm a vegetarian.
Yeah. So
it's like, that's a rib. That's just the thing. That's a rib. Look at it. It looks like someone just reached into the cow and just ripped it out. And it's spelled rips.
They ripped it out?
They ripped it out. Rick's ripped ribs.
Yeah,
absolutely. Sorry. So there's this.
No, So I think that does play a part where, like, if it's something that disgusts you, like just like the Duke Blue Devils, then it's just like I still haven't come around on liking Duke players when they go to the NBA, unless they're on the Lakers. Then it's fine. Like, the disgust disappears when you put on purple and gold. But you're JJ Redick and you're on the Clippers. I'm like, ugh.
Yeah, man.
I remember laughing when you cried when you missed a 3-pointer in the ACC tournament. And in my head, you're still that big a loser. And if you were on the Lakers, though, I might come around. I might. And I animated about that stuff. And I know the whole time I'm like, this is nuts. Why do I care? Yes, I do care. And this is important. And at least this type of, good old either or battle just doesn't lead to death. But, to me, there's the discuss things part of it. And the other element I wonder is, is there a way that issues that function really divisively are best dealt with by dealing with some other issue? That, like, I think that a lot of the animosity that produces Trump making sense to a lot of our friends who are Like if you ask me, Tripp, do you have friends that voted for Trump that are actually better human beings than you? And it's not going to be hard. I'm not the nicest person, but the moment they were part of him being president, I decided in my head, I didn't think much about it, but they are horrible. I'm like, he sexually assaulted people and bragged about it, and you're a female. Mm-hmm. Like, you can't make Slick Willie jokes about Bill Clinton and then vote for him. You have to take it back. You have to take them all back. You have to tell me that true love waits unless the president's in the room. Then apparently it's locker room. I was remember being livid, and I still am. But but if you were like, oh, well, you know people, and there's this context in that a lot of he's the solution when a lot of the change that the more heated issues is a way of like resisting it, right? Like going, oh, well, now we have new bathroom signs and all this stuff. And honestly, in rural parts of the South, you're now in small towns where white is becoming a minority ethnic group of the town, and they only know that when they go to Walmart. I mean, this is what my in-laws said. Like Asheboro, where my in-laws are from. Like when I first started dating Alicia, there were Hispanic people that lived there. Now, from what they say, like at the school and at Walmart, now there's just lots. And one of my, I guess, I don't know how somehow they're in the family. I see them twice every 5 years. Not like, close-ish. Somehow they're related to my family. Or is married to one of them. I don't know. But he said something when we were at a cookout, and he goes, well, it's not that I'm not trying to just be mean. I'm just trying to say this isn't the town I want to live in anymore. And no one asked me if I wanted it to change, because I don't. But I don't want to be mean to people or anything. I just don't want to have to live with them. And so I thought, like, I wonder if sometimes picking a different battle to invest in can like lower the animosity, where if you get to know people in this in a practice of discernment to really like tackle an issue that is less controversial but just as important, like not putting all the pig waste in the river, right, or something like that. That then you're building relationships where you see yourself acting for the well-being of all the kids that are there that are going to drink it, or something might be more fruitful because what was the Howard Thurman line you put in there?
Community cannot for long feed on itself. It needs to be always open to unknown and undiscovered brothers and sisters.
Yeah. Right. And like sometimes like I could talk to this guy and he not raise his voice and lose it because I'm in his family. But if I wasn't, and I was saying this stuff that is like hippie married in California cousin or whatever, he would have just lost it. So like, I wonder if that's not part of it, that maybe we find other ways where we cooperate and work together, because the friendships undo the revulsion effect, and how do you do it if what go around the side and pick a different topic or something. Yeah. It
becomes conversations. It becomes disagreements with people, and not just faceless, nothing people, like just either faceless monsters somewhere, or and everyone has probably their group or their person or their whatever that you're going to be sitting next to at the heavenly banquet, and you're going to have to be forced to like deal with. So I guess it's probably everybody has this, but that's the thing. It's not anything goes. It's not like it's all just fine and hunky dory, and let's all just be really polite and sip mint juleps and watch the horse race. But it is to say that like it's a human being that you're talking to and disagreeing with, and there's just you're able to actually disagree better. I think when it's a person that you're doing that with. And so, yeah, exactly. You orient around shared concerns at your local level that can manifest these sorts of things, that you don't have to get into that sort of game, but they're there, if that makes any sense. So I think that's wise, good insight, honestly. It's tricky because it's not like just by automatically going to the local level, we're going to just gain these competencies that we've lost. You know, like if somebody's just feeding on a strict diet of Alex Jones or occupied whatever, then I don't think it's going to be hard, because you're going to go to this level and you're going to, I think you're probably you have these sort of, convictions that allow you to do that sort of work, and probably he does as well, but not everybody does. So, it's true, but there's a hope of seeing that there's more that people in this sort of situation or that sort of situation have that they should be working on together. Again, if we don't find a way, Christians included, to see that we're in this together, we are screwed. We are screwed. And that's all I have to say about that. So we better find some way to do that. Because the one thing I do know is that either getting all the theory right about neoliberalism is not going to stop or do anything. And posting some angry Facebook thing is not going to do anything. It's just not. I mean, it feels good. It scratches an itch, but ultimately it doesn't. Posting some big, long Atlantic think piece, I love it. I do it. It's very important. I'm not denigrating. I said, I'm not saying that's not important, but that can't be it. If that's used as a way of sort of releasing these energies and then sort of writing off whole swaths of the population, that's bad. That's bad. You can think about it in terms of enemy love. You can think about it in terms of neighbor love. And in certain cases, it will be enemy love, right? But Christians have commands to do those sorts of things. So yeah, my fear or my concern, or I can hear a concern that allows for a sort of apology for the sort of ongoing perpetuation of these convictions and beliefs and narratives that are just deeply destructive to people, right? Especially in white conversations around some sort of barbecue, like in my family, right? But on the other hand, it's there where I can be most actually say a firm no, and I can still look somebody in the face and do that. Does that make sense? Yeah. Even about, and then on issues that aren't these hot button issues or whatever. That the irony about it is some of these hot button issues right now will be in Southwest Virginia or something, where there's this fear of some sort of the Muslims are coming. And it's there's not a mosque within 300 yards, miles of this. What do you? Yeah, it's so it's so just faceless other fear. You know what I mean?
Well, I mean, even the stupid wall. Republicans that are on the border don't want the wall. It's ones in North Carolina want the wall. They don't. It's just nuts. The further you have the ability to feel more threatened by knowledge of someone you have no interaction with than the actual people that interact with the situation. Yeah. And I think it's such a good example because you would think if you just listen to the Facebook that every Republican wants a big wall, the beautiful wall, the Trump wall, when they probably rename it, you see it from space, and it's don't come here. And but in reality, no, I mean that is an energizing talking point for 17% of the country, and they don't live on the border.
That's right.
That, and so it's just it's more of a signal than it is an actual idea, and the people whose lives it would touch don't even want it, even though it's their team. It's so weird to me. Yeah. But
you're right. It's a signal. It's a signal of a sort of identity. It becomes tied up. Same with climate change. I've been thinking a lot about not since, but the Paris, and it gets tied up with an identity and a team. And then that it stifles sort of any kind of actual interesting conversation about, right? So I'm with you.
So yesterday, on the day we're recording this, was Pentecost Sunday. And one of the things that I noticed this year that kind of stuck out to me, it really resonates with a lot that you talk about in the book, is that the notion of tongues on Pentecost that mainliners just get uncomfortable with, and they're hey, maybe we should do the Psalm text this Sunday. Is that there's kind of two different sides to the tongues part. One part is that the one speaking in tongues speaks so that the other can hear them. Yep. And the other side is that when you hear it, and that the other hears without them having to translate it. Mm-hmm. Right. So the way you speak and the way you hear and listen, it's about giving full dignity to the other where they are. And, yes. In the text, there's like people from all over the world are all hanging out there. I mean, even Cretans and Arabs were in Jerusalem on Pentecost. It was very convenient because I don't know if we have any evidence this is a regular occurrence, but they were all there. And so one of the things that made me think of is how Pentecost, like a lot of people emphasize it being like the undoing of Babel, where, God gives everyone a bunch of different languages to keep human hubris under control. But I mean, the other side of it is that the diversity of humanity actually became the fertile soil for the work of the Spirit and the coming of God. And that the work of the Spirit and the coming of God actually meant that to be filled with the Spirit was to learn to listen to the other without them having to translate, and learning to speak so they can hear you. That the onus on the one is filled with the Spirit is attending to the difference of the other without them having to, exist in our world. And like when you think of all the issues that are being divisive and things today, half of the heat from them is when people of privilege, often Christians, basically say like, I'm not going to listen to you until you say it in a way I can hear you. Like just think of the regular responses of people that aren't trying to be jerks to Black Lives Matter, right? Mm-hmm. Like, well, okay, so some police get, act out. It's just like once you start, you have a bunch of Black Panthers and Marxists around, and then people get violent. And I don't want police to do that, but maybe they should really do it differently. It's just very loud. And and we do it for all kinds of things. It just, it kind of pops immediately in my head. And so the notion of communal discernment and the role of friendship, to me, like really connected to that kind of flip side of tongues.
Yes, absolutely. And you see that connection a lot with like Jesus' interactions with, you see Jesus encountering people all the time that are not, it seems Jesus goes out of his way in the stories to go find, like on the edge of he finds Syrophoenician folks. But then you see this connection between hearing and listening. You see Jesus like put his fingers in people's ears, and that's connected directly with these principalities and powers that have kept this guy from being able to hear, but also speak. Well, they're tied together. And so I think that's really right. I've unpacked that other places and places I'm writing right now, but the connection between listening, that's the real bit to me of that moment. The speech part gets emphasized a lot. They came out and spoke, and they can speak, but the listening piece is the real. It seems to me like obviously the rub of that place, that there is a sort of place in which people can speak and hear. Not everybody, right? Not everybody, but some people can speak and hear what's going on with their own cultural sort of resources and competencies. Now, there's a sense in which you could imagine something like whiteness, which is not that's a construct that is sort of kind of ebbs away and down certain differences within this quote white group, right? That other people can get sort of blessed with entrance into this category called white over time that weren't at first. That can block the ability for people to hear because they are sort of operating under this sort of construct or whatever. And once you're blessed with entry into it, then you're like no longer, you don't want to listen anymore. You don't want to be included. So it's the deep attention to that as a real gospel spirit issue that is true and good, and a real part of it. It's not just anything, again, it's not just anything goes. It's not like listening is it. I'm just taking right now, there's a lot of like emphasis on like, we need to listen, especially from certain sectors that I'm kind of suspicious of, because they seem to be, it just seems funky to me that certain groups who have been unreceptive, it seems to me, for a long time, all of a sudden are now calling for everyone to listen to one another. So it's not just anything goes, but it is that connection is important. But it might be the case that something like the movement of the Spirit will be required. You know what I mean? If that's going to happen, and not some sort of metaphorical way, but like in a real way. Like the movement of the Spirit of God is going to be required to open the ears for us to be able to hear one another in cases in which it's hard to do. It's hard. Yeah.
Well, actually the Pentecost story goes on to quote that whole Joel text, about sons and daughters, slaves and free, people from all over. Like it goes through the binaries and then says like the Spirit of God is being poured out on all flesh, to have new visions and dream new dreams. And so to me, I think like that vision that all flesh in its diversity and its difference is the place in which God's otherness is found. Like in the other, God's holy otherness is discovered, and it's in that very flesh where God's the new era essentially that Joel's talking about comes into being, and the fleshiness of Pentecost is powerful, because so often I think the lack of flesh and theology ends up making lots of our doctrines useless and our convictions kind of impotent.
Absolutely. Totally. Very well said. Nothing to add there. Just absolutely true. I mean, I would that would happen. That's kind of what I think is that we need to find practice. And it's not just communal discernment. And I also stress that in the book too. It's not like I think communal discernment is some sort of magic practice that does this. It can go wrong, but it's also, you need other things. You need other practices. And this is one that I think might need to be reclaimed, but there's others too. And whatever gets the job done, we need that sort of move going forward, because if we really believe that, and we really think that that is true, that God is seen and manifest in the faces of others, that this God, it comes down to a God that is not holdable. That's what you see, wildness, and you see the social manifestation of that looking like sharing stuff and looking like you're drunk, and some sort of combination of those two. So if you're interested in finding a God, and I am, that is not tameable in that kind of a way, but is good, then that's what we should be doing and looking after to do. But some people do it, but if you're not, then don't do it, because it's going to get weird. It's going to get hard. And, there's not assurances, I guess, is what I mean. There's not assurance in sort of a community. It's just sort of like, and maybe that's when you turn to face it or want it, is when you're like, I either need to find this kind of thing or I'm done with it. Right. And for some reason you're drawn to that. Yeah. So,
one of the things that, maybe this could be the end, because I realize we've talked for a long time, but I'm interested in what have been like the insights, questions, learnings you've had now that you've moved back to North Carolina and are getting to teach undergrad students at Campbell. Like, what are the ideas, the things that are exciting that you're learning or questioning, the things that the students are putting on your burner for brain space?
Not related to this, right? Just new whatever.
Yeah.
So I have been thinking about and working with students born of classroom conversations and born of stuff going on in North Carolina. I'm working on stuff right now about theology and monuments, particularly Confederate monuments. So I presented this thing at Society of Christian Ethics about that. And that was before, in fact, I presented it in New Orleans. And that was before all this has been going on. But I'm been quite excited and interested in unpacking what are the sort of following like theopoetics, like what is the sort of like ingrained and implied theological convictions in the way these spaces are set up, irrespective of what they do. What are the sort of ideologies they're giving rise to? And I've seen in students, as I've talked with some students at Campbell about that, it's just really an interesting avenue into conversations. So it's kind of what you're getting at. It's like an avenue into conversations. Let's have a conversation about race. That's one of those things. If you go into a room of 18-year-olds, everybody doesn't want to do it. No one's not quite sure what we're going to talk about. There's all this sort of like fear about it. I'm going to say the wrong thing or whatever. But this avenue allows folks into a conversation about that gets into like inheritances, past sin, structural injustice. That if I talk about those things explicitly, what's the aesthetic? What's the goal? I mean, what's the goal in which these monuments assume that our society and humans in general are headed towards, that are implied just in the way that you have this set up? So that's one I've been thinking about a lot. Yeah.
Oh,
which is,
I'm definitely interested.
Driving me crazy because it's everywhere. Like, you get this idea and you're talking about it, and then every day there's more and more stuff, which goes to these questions of receptivity and conversations in public spaces among people who are different. Yeah, it's good. Also in North Carolina right now, there's a lot of stuff going on at the local political level and in reaction to a lot of stuff's happening locally here in North Carolina that is exciting. So I think that's good that that's happening and going on. I don't know if you know William Barber, Dr.
Mm-hmm.
William. Yeah, he's got stuff going on now. He's recently stopped working with NAACP, and he's doing his own sort of nonprofit work thing now, kind of trying to redo the Moral Mondays thing across the country. And it's an exciting thing he's got going on. So there's stuff going on. You know how it is teaching. A lot of times what I'm trying to do is, and what I found, I guess we can end this, but I found that what's been great about teaching undergrads is getting to the first principles questions again. So the questions I had gotten away from just as far as you do a doctorate, as you know, you get far and far down the rabbit hole, and then you come back to teaching an 18-year-old, and those, what Dr. Upper would call these 2 a.m. questions, are all of a sudden brought back up about, wait a minute, where is God when my grandma died? And I had thought about that, but I hadn't always thought about this as it hadn't been as existential of a question as it is again, as I start to wrestle with it again with somebody who is coming at this for the first time. Does that make sense?
Oh yeah, definitely.
It's been a gift. It's been a real gift, a struggling gift, but a gift. Because now I'm having to do questions. It's almost like they don't get solved. I don't know what's going on.
I want to know when you're going to do the senior seminar on the Campbell statue at Campbell. They added that really sweet camel statue.
The camel.
Yeah, Humphrey. There's the big Humphrey monument. That's a theopoetic piece if there ever was one. In Bowie's Creek, North Carolina, there is a monument to Humphrey the camel, where every day's hump day at the creek.
Someone should take Archibald and just unhook him and sit him around the camel. Just have him, riding that thing bareback. I think that
could be the class project. It'd be your swan song. They're like, whoa, okay. Look, I thought you were talking about monuments. It's all good. You talk about Robert E. Lee all you want, but don't you mess with the camel.
The camel, my gosh. Is that true that that's the only place in the country with that mascot?
I do not know another place that has a camel mascot in the United States of America.
It's not banana slugs, but it's pretty random. What is that doing? But, yeah,
well, no, great. I mean, people haven't been to Bowie's Creek. There are a lot of camels there. If you ever say to yourself, what's it like to go to an extremely small town with hundreds of camels? You get each dorm has their own camel.
That's part of your entrance. But I mentioned the thing in class. I think I told you I mentioned this in class. You had always said every day's hump day. I didn't go to Campbell. You did. And so I said one day, just out of hand, every day's hump day. And the students looked at me barefoot, stone-faced, as if, what are you talking about? I was like, every day's hump day. That's the thing we say. And they're like, no, we don't.
They got rid of the bumper sticker. I guess someone finally put together that when you sell 18-year-olds bumper stickers for their for their car that says every day's hump day, in Bowie's Creek, that it could have been taken differently. You remember those cool hats where in the 90s where you have the mascot in the middle and they're white and different color stitches? Ours was white with orange and black writing on it, and it just said Humpers. That was the Campbell University real thin, and then Humpers right in the middle. They made that and was selling it, and then they put it together. They stopped selling that while I was there, but when I left, they were still selling everyday's hump day stickers. That
had to be a top seller. I mean, that with University of South Carolina and Oregon State, that had to be the three.
Yeah, Humpers, and you can't complain. I mean, we have more camels than any other D1 school does. Lots of camels all over the place.
Just like, you know, Elon used to be, before I went there, it was called the Fighting Christians. And we had the same thing. There's fighting Christians everywhere on campus. Everywhere you went, every dorm, there were Christians just punching each other vigorously in the. Yeah. Dr. Pugh officiating, of course.
Oh, yeah. Well, I mean, very few people have all their dorms named after the Christological controversies of the early church. But if you just have, like, you have one side of the hall, Arian, and the other side's Athanasian. And at night, they just start coming out, swinging.
Just as Santa Claus.
Just like Santa. Pulling off sandals, slapping somebody. You're like, if it hasn't been assumed, it hasn't been redeemed. And Santa's just like slugging. I mean, yeah, that's why I you know, I'm passing. I'm not going to say what I was thinking. It'd get edited out. It would have gotten edited out.
Yeah, man. Campbell, man. Yeah. So yeah, absolutely. Camels everywhere. Or students with those like backpacks, those hiking bags with lots of in them. Yeah,
water.
There are them.
You put water in it, a camel.
I'm sure it's only.
Yeah.
This is a Baptist school. I don't know if you know, Tripp. There's only water.
I'm an alumni of Campbell University. I know it is full of people that never drink. Like when I was at Campbell, like we just prayed a lot and cared for others.
Yeah.
I absolutely never
celebrated your 4 fragile freedoms.
Mm-hmm.
They were fragile, but they were free.
Yeah. I invented a 5th freedom while I was at Campbell. But that's like a different podcast altogether.
Yeah.
I have to have Dr. Jonas back on to talk about that.
Definitely.
I'm not sure he knew I invented the 5th freedom while I was a student at Campbell. But
I'd love to imagine his Tripp.
Yeah, that's kind of how it'd go. And I'd be like, it wasn't just me. Ben Boswell and Michael Goodman helped. Like, oh, well, in that case.
Yeah, right.
Well, it was totally fun hanging out with you on the internet. And I remember, I hope everyone goes and buys a book. Or if you want to be super radical, I guess steal it.
Yeah,
but at least read it.
Steal it from someone who's bought it, though. I don't know if that works.
Yeah, you don't like break the law. Like, why would you do that?
Yeah, that's like Wendell Berry starts one of his books. He says, like, if you've stolen this book, I praise your ingenuity, and I don't agree with him on that one. No, go buy the book.
Yeah, because he already knew he was going to sell enough to get another advance. You know what I mean?
That's probably exactly right.
Look, I have a new theory. If they aren't tenured, you should really buy the book. If they're tenured, then borrow it.